Today, we're going to talk about the relationship between the DXY, the US dollar index, and also Bitcoin. And I'm also going to give you guys an update on the Bitcoin RSI that we talked about last week, because there are some really interesting developments that you're not going to want to miss. Now, if you guys are enjoying this content, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and also click the bell icon to get notifications, because I am releasing these videos every day, Monday through Friday. Now, I talked about the DXY and BTC yesterday in yesterday's video, but I want to really kind of deep dive into it today and show you exactly why it matters. So here we have the DXY in orange, okay, and Bitcoin in blue. Now, you can see here, this is ever since Bitcoin's inception back here. And of course, the DXY again here in orange. So what's interesting about this is if you go back over the years and just look at the relationship between the two, every single time Bitcoin is topped out at the end of each bull cycle, okay, the dollar has bottomed. The DXY has bottomed. And remember, the DXY is just a basket of currencies that makes up the US dollar index. So every single time Bitcoin is topped out, again, Bitcoin is in blue, it has correlated pretty much with a DXY bottom. Now you can see back here, we had a Bitcoin top here, the DXY put in a bottom here. Bitcoin topped out here during the next cycle, we had a low for the DXY. Once again, the last full cycle, we had Bitcoin put in a top, the DXY putting in a low. So every single time Bitcoin is topped out, the DXY has also carved out a bottom. Now, this is not a situation where Bitcoin is in the driver's seat. This is very much an event where the DXY is triggering these moves, okay? So when the dollar starts to strengthen, we typically get a bear market from Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto market. So the question now is, where are we in this cycle? Are we seeing kind of the same thing happen? We obviously saw the DXY bottom here at the same time. Bitcoin has started to put in a top up around $60,000 to $70,000. But Bitcoin is still just moving sideways over the past 13 months. And there's a development on the DXY that makes me think things are a little different this time. What I'm referring to here is if you look at the macro trend for the DXY, from this low down here, we do have a trend line that recently broke down. Okay, so this is a macro trend from the DXY. Remember, it's in orange here, and you can see where over the past decade plus, we've had this series of higher highs and higher lows. However, what happened back here is we had the first lower high in this series. Okay, now also you can see the DXY broke down from this trend line back here, and it currently retested it this past week. So this is why we're seeing the DXY rotate lower this week. And this is something that I've talked about on Twitter and also YouTube at length. So if we look here, let's go to the daily chart and look at what's happened here over the past 12 months or so. Okay, so you can see that this right here was when the DXY bottomed out. It essentially formed a double bottom here. And this was the time that Bitcoin topped out at $64,000. Now it's also exactly when BTC started to move sideways in this range over the past 13 months. Now, notice back here, okay, this was March of 2020. The DXY topped out at the same exact time. Bitcoin bottomed just above $3,000. So once Bitcoin bottomed here, DXY topped out, DXY moved lower, and Bitcoin moved higher. Okay, now once the DXY bottomed last year, early 2021, that's when we saw Bitcoin starting to go sideways. So this is why we need to see the DXY start to weaken. Okay, so we need to see from here, this orange line, the DXY, start to pull back and weaken, carve lower highs and lower lows in order to see Bitcoin really start to move higher again. So if we see this uptrend from the DXY start to reverse, then it's very likely that we also see Bitcoin head back toward all-time highs. All right, so that's why all of this matters. So let's go ahead and take a look at just the DXY here, and let's see what's going on. So we've discussed this recently where the DXY put in a false breakup here above 97, and you can see something similar down here at 95.50. Okay, so we had a false break here and a false break here. Now the false break below 95.50 triggered a sharp move higher. The false break above 97 triggered a sharp sell-off. But what's interesting about this, and I talked about this in yesterday's video, is if you look at the weekly time frame, okay, this week is potentially setting up to be very similar to what happened back in March of 2020. Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin is about to increase by 1,500% again, but I am saying that if we see the US dollar rotate lower, like the chart I just showed you, there is a very good chance we see Bitcoin start to break out to the upside. Now, the key here is going to be a weekly close from the DXY below 95.63. That was last week's open. And you can see where the market retested this area today. Okay, so yesterday closed below 95.50 and also last week's open. And today has so far tested it. So if today closes below 95.63, then we technically have a bearish engulfing week here. Notice how this week, this red candle engulfs the previous one. Okay, so this would be a bearish engulfing candle. And again, this comes at a multi-year swing high, very similar to what we saw back here in March of 2020. This red candle right here was a bearish engulfing candle, and we all know what happened next. Okay, this is when the DXY sold off, Bitcoin started the bull market. So I'm not saying that we're on the brink of, again, Bitcoin going to 1,500% or the start of a whole new, bull market for cryptos. But what I am saying is, if this plays out similar to what we had back here, and we even just get a 10% move lower from the DXY, that would be huge. Even a move back here toward these lows down here, okay, maybe 6 or 7%, that would likely trigger a massive move higher for Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto market. So it doesn't take much from the DXY to see movement in risk assets like crypto. Now let's take a look at something else here that also hints at a potential pullback. Okay, so if we look at the monthly time frame, what you'll notice here is ever since the 2011 low, so back here on this low, there is a trend line here that recently broke down, and the DXY is actually retesting this level as new resistance. Okay, so here's our trend line, and you can see where it's very well worn over the past decade. All right, so this level broke down back here, retested it as resistance here, and also retested it as resistance last week, okay? Last month. So as of now, guys, this is a breakdown in the macro trend. It's the same thing I just showed you when we compared the DXY to BTC. Now, this is also very similar to what the DXY did all the way back here in the 90s and early 2000s. So we had a very similar trend line where we had a multi-year macro uptrend from the US dollar. Same thing now, okay? Macro uptrend from the US dollar ever since the 2000 low, and we've since had a breakdown from this trend line. Now, the only difference here is that we didn't have a retest back here. Okay, so when this trend line broke down, we didn't have a retest as new resistance and then a rotation lower like we're getting now. But not every breakdown is the same. Furthermore, what you can see here is over the past few decades, the US dollar has been in a macro downtrend. Okay, so that's also interesting. We have lower highs and lower lows over the past, 40 years. So really, guys, I mean, this right now looks to me like the dollar is trying to rotate lower from a macro uptrend. Now, what's going to be interesting about this is that Bitcoin has only existed during a macro uptrend from the dollar. Okay, so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the crypto market if we do get a macro downtrend from the dollar like we saw back here in the early 2000s. And this is kind of why I think too that the time of Bitcoin going through these, quote unquote 4-year cycles and just playing out perfectly every 4 years are behind us. I think those days are gone. I think this is going to be a very different 10 years for the crypto market. I think we're going to see potentially shorter bear markets, shorter bull markets. There's a case to be made that the crypto market has been in a bear market since April of last year. Ever since it started to go sideways, we have seen 50 to 60% pullbacks ever since that time. And when you look at this potential macro change from the DXY, I think that there's a lot to support that idea. And again, Bitcoin has never existed in a macro downtrend from the US dollar. It's only existed while the DXY has been making higher highs and higher lows over the past 10 years. So very interesting stuff here. I think that, right now from the DXY, what I'm looking for is a close below 95.63, like I said, to really confirm that bearish engulfing candle. And furthermore, I would like to see the market next week close below 94.60. Okay, so right now, this market has been carving higher highs and higher lows ever since last year. So in order to reverse this, we need to see lower highs and lower lows. In order to do that, we need to see the DXY take out 9460, carve that first lower low, and then also that first lower high to change this trend. Okay, because until that time, a bearish engulfing week is great, but until it takes out 9460, really this market is still very much in an uptrend. But for the reasons I mentioned, I do think the DXY is getting ready to rotate lower, potentially even put in a macro top, okay, where we could get potentially several years of a lower US dollar. All right, so now let's go ahead and jump into the Bitcoin chart, and I'll give you guys an update there. So the very first thing, guys, I want to talk about is the RSI, which I mentioned this last week, and we talked about how the RSI was forming a similar trend line that we got back here during this run up and pullback that happened back here in May to July. All right, now the current trend line was not nearly as significant as this one back here, but you can see where the RSI broke out from this trend line back here. And so far we're seeing something very similar. Now, something happened this week, guys, that I do want to show you, because the RSI not only broke out from this trend line, but it also retested the trend line as new support before moving higher. So very much like you'd see price do, the RSI did the exact same thing. So right now, guys, we have kind of step one of the reversal taking shape. Now, I also want to talk about the volume here, though, before we get to step two, because the volume is starting to increase. So the other day I mentioned that it was likely we'd see a rotation lower down here into support, potentially around $36,000, maybe 35. And we did see a low right around $36,000. The reason I thought we'd get that rotation is because if you look at the volume here during this latest relief rally, all right, when the market was making higher highs and higher lows like this, the volume was decreasing, which hinted at a lack of conviction from buyers. And today we are seeing the volume start to break that trend, which is great to see. Now, the second step to confirming this breakout, okay, we've seen the RSI breakout from this trend line, which was step one. Step two is going to be close above 40 to 42. Now, a close above 40,000 would be great. However, I really want to see a close above 42, which is this trend line off of the April high. Okay, and it's also kind of the top of this resistance area. Remember, levels like this are not exact prices. Okay, 40,000 is important, yes, but this area extends all the way up toward about 42,000. Okay, so I really want to see Bitcoin close above 42. It doesn't have to happen today, but we do need to see a daily close, and especially if we got a weekly close this Sunday above 42, guys, that would really confirm the reversal for me, expose 45 to 46,000 and probably $50,000. But with that said, guys, 40 to 42,000 is going to be very significant. I would be surprised to see Bitcoin just punch through it in 1 or 2 days. It could take a few days here, but the momentum right now is pretty strong. I mean, you can see from the RSI it's strong. You can see from the volume it's strengthening. So right now, I mean, 40 to 42 is very much the area in focus. And I would not be at all surprised to see over the coming days to see Bitcoin close back above that area, flip it back to support, fake out everybody that thought it was going to 30,000, which, like I said yesterday, I do not think we're going to see $30,000. That's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong. But if it did close above 42, guys, again, that would confirm the bullish breakout for me. Now, there's always a chance, okay, we have to weigh out every scenario here, and there's always a chance that we do get that rotation lower. But as I've said recently, as long as Bitcoin is above 35, it is premature to call for $30,000 in my opinion. 35,000 is an extremely strong support. So as long as it's above this area, I think the people calling for 30,000, and especially those calling for 20,000, are doing so prematurely, okay? I think that the odds of a bounce, of a significant bounce from 35,000, as I've said for weeks now, I mean, you guys know I've been talking about this since we were back here, that we were likely to see a move down toward 40. I didn't quite know we would see 35 at the time, and it's taken a little bit longer than I thought it would, but I continue to like the odds of a significant relief rally from the $35,000 area. Okay, now there is a chance, as I said, we do see 30,000, but Bitcoin would have to close below 35,000 in order to expose the $30,000 area. So a couple of things before we wrap up, guys. I am still in my long position. I took some off the other day, right around 39,000, but I do have about 75% of that position still on, with an average rate around 38,000. So I am in profit now. I'll take some off if we do get 45 to 46, and again at 50. But for now, I do like my chances in that position, so I'm fine with holding it. Again, it's spot only. I'm not using any leverage. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is something maybe for a future video. If we do see Bitcoin hold the line at 35,000 and put in a higher low here compared to the one that we saw back here. Okay, and the reason for that is because this could be shaping up to be what's called a running flat pattern. Now, this typically happens near the top of an uptrend where you get a market that made a higher high back here, and then it made a higher low right here. Okay, so a lot of people think this is a topping pattern, it's a double top, but you get a higher low, which in this case would be right around $35,000, maybe $33,000, and then you get a significant move back to this all-time high and a new all-time high, which would imply that Bitcoin over the coming months is set to move past that $70,000 area. Now, of course, that's all contingent on holding the line at 35,000 and also closing above $42,000. But if Bitcoin can do those two things and we do see the DXY start to rotate lower, like I mentioned, then I do think there's a very good chance that we see Bitcoin put in an all-time high later this year. But again, just keep in mind, 40 to 42 is resistance for now. We need to see a close above that to confirm the breakout. All right, guys, so I hope that this video helped. If it did, subscribe to the channel, click that bell icon to get notifications, and I will talk to you guys again next week.